Welcome, everyone. My name is Beverley and I'll be talking with the concept of another type of treatment, another way of treating people who have a mental illness diagnosed by psychiatrists or doctors or anything like that. About me, I didn't start my study. I was 48 when I sat the adult re-entry exam and spent 9 years, and I got 4 degrees, and I specialised in adversity trauma, especially in childhood. My thesis was on that. I've presented at world and Australasian conferences. I've been on CEO of 2 not-for-profit organisations to dealing with mental health, and I was on the board for the Mental Health Resource Centre, which is a government-run funding organisation. And so, been there, done that. The not-for-profit organisations, one I was in and helped set up and do everything, we weren't particularly funded well, so I never got paid. So it was 7 years of being a volunteer worker. If I got $20 for petrol, I was, well, thought it was good, because I'm dedicated to help people. And I was telephone support, home support, run the support group. So I have very, very vast experience. Like if a person was suicidal, we'd really take 2 of us and we'd go and stay with her and talk to them until we can get them over. If a mum had some kids and they were going to miss out on Christmas and she was all distraught, we'd buy a few gifts and fancy up the house. And same with birthdays, you know, have a candle and a cake and a few presents for the kids. And it was amazing going into people's houses and you see how they live. Like if they're a hoarder, you're just going down a little corridor. Why does a woman clean her bathroom the way she does? She stood at the door, got buckets of water and threw it on the walls and everything, and that's how she cleaned the bathroom. When you looked into it, her mother tried to commit suicide a couple of times when she was a kid, and slit her wrist, and the girl would get the ambulance to come, and then no one followed through. So at 12, 14, 16, she had to clean the blood all off the walls, and that's how she cleans the bathroom. So everything what you do usually has a memory behind it. So, and psychiatrists now get so many hours where they have to talk to people in community centres and that, so outside of hospital settings, which they brought in just before I came here. So when I first started, I thought schizophrenia was a chemical imbalance, because that was the belief back then. And what I had wrong with me was a trauma disorder. So I said, if it happened to me, there should be a way to undo it. But through my studies, and going to lots of different conferences, I found out that schizophrenia isn't a chemical imbalance, proven. Schizophrenia is a misnomer. Schizophrenia, split personality, no such thing. It's what because I was in the Mental Health Resource Centre, the schizophrenic education person said to you, whenever she goes and gives a talk, she has to say, you know, people think it's multiple personalities, but it's not. So what it is a psychosis. A person's in psychosis. So when the person, I'll tell you about Professor Loren Mosher. This is the studies he did in the 1970s. He ran a whole state in America. He ran the hospital. And when people came in psychosis, he'd say, you go to the hospital, stay in the hospital with the drugs. And he had a home. He said, you go into the home. So there was no rules or regulations. Whoever walked in, he just randomly did it. And what happened was, the ones who went into the home, they had volunteer workers there. And while they were in the psychotic period, if they wanted to lie in bed and have someone hold their hand, someone did that for the whole time. She said there was one woman who wanted to dance naked out in the backyard, they let her. So whatever the person did, wanted to feel in their psychosis, they allowed them in a safe environment. Psychosis has a beginning and an end. Now, what they're doing now is a person goes into psychosis and then the doctors give them a drug which shuts down everything. But the person, in most cases, they don't like the drug. The amount of people, when I've run conferences and they come up, they hate the drugs and they try to get off of them because they're like walking zombies. So they go off the drugs without the doctor's permission, and then they go back in psychosis. And the doctor will say, see, that proves to you you have to stay on the drugs for the rest of your life. But they're forgetting or not recognising that if you allowed the person to work through the psychosis, what Professor Lauren Mosher did, they get well, they go back to leading their own life, and he didn't have any fall back into them because they worked through their issues. Now, he took this research, proved it to the government organisations and that, and lo and behold, he was sacked. Discredited through the whole sector as a, and he lost everything. So when you go off the drugs, the psychosis comes back because it's only holding it down. So they go back into psychosis, and that's when the doctor says you have to stay on it for life because it comes back. But if they're allowed to go into a nurturing, supportive way with good food, nutrition, so they can work through it, they will come to the end. But the way they're treating it now, you're basically in it for life. And it's a terrible place to be. I mean, if you want the benefits of the government and all this sort of thing, schizophrenia is the best disorder to have because you get the pensions, they don't expect you to work, and they don't. So, but it's the worst one to get out and to have. So the next person, because I'm always researching, I'm always studying, I came across.
How long was psychosis normally last?
It didn't matter.
Like
a few weeks, a few months.
What lasts a while? Like, it's not quick.
Whatever the person did, whatever they needed, they had. They had volunteer people come in and support.
But it takes a while though. It's not.
Yeah, it could. There's no time limit because everyone's so different. And he went back with the stats, with the pricing. If a person, say, was 3 months in there and they had somebody with them 24 hours, that type of thing, and in the home, food and everything, then compared it to the hospital and the drugs, it was cheaper.
Had a better result.
Does that include illegal, if a person's taken illegal drugs?
No, he just did the government drugs, the drug company drugs.
Yeah.
So I follow a man called, he's now a Professor John Reed, New Zealand, here in Australia, then a professor now in England. And he was brilliant. He was the one who was going to psychiatry conferences and saying them, your fraudsters, your placebo works better than the drug, but you manipulate the drug, things on it to show that it's supposed to work, but the placebo worked better. So he was saying all these sorts of things. Now he came out with a Professor Bruce Perry and another man from McCalvich or something. I have a form of dysphasia where I have trouble pronouncing some words, especially if I'm tired. So if I have to learn a new word, I have to practice it. Now they brought out the trauma-genic neurodevelopmental model of schizophrenia. I've got his papers. It's quite long, and I don't understand all of it because it's in psychiatry terms. Bottom line is, you have trauma in childhood. This is mainly men at this stage because men and women act differently under psychosis and schizophrenia. Trauma in childhood, and then somewhere in your teen years up to about 25, you can have the same trauma and that or similar trauma, and that will trigger off a psychosis. And then they're in the sector. And with women, it's usually 30 to 35 because the way they react differently. But, and they proved, because Professor Bruce Perry works with children, traumatized children, he took hundreds of PET scans of the traumatized child's brain. He then compared it to the same child when they became 19, 20, 21. The damage done to the child's brain through the trauma, the beatings or whatever, shows up again in the, when they go into psychosis. It's the same brain, the same problems are there. And they've shown that if you handled the trauma and took the trauma out, the person can get well. So, and that applies to every disorder. Bipolar, the hoarder. I mean, why can't we let anything go? You know, the dead cat, you know, some of these ones you see on anorexia. That is a control thing. Usually something happens around about 3. I'm going global. This is the ones I've seen with who I work with. About 3, something happens, which is out of their control. And then when they go into puberty, their body's under control, and the anorexia comes in with that part of them trying to control the body. And there's one there, example there in the book. The boy thought he was a dog. That I was running groups on depression, anxiety, stress. I had about 50 women come through. I was doing that while I was at uni. And one of the women said, my niece has come out of hospitals, anorexia. Could you go and see her? And I said, I've never worked with them, never read a book. Well, I've sat alongside the person who runs the anorexic organisation. And she said to me, Beverley, we've got bipolar, schizophrenia, mood disorders in this group with all these, she said, and they're all getting well. Why can't you go? So she arranged for me to go, and I went and knocked on the woman's door. Name is Paula. She's written her name in the book, so I'm not breaching confidentiality. And I went into the kitchen. Husband was sitting there, and I said, tell me about your anorexia. She said, I get hungry. I go to the fridge. The voice in her head says, you can't eat. And it's so strong, won't allow them to eat. And when she said voice in the head, I said, oh, that's a piece of cake. I can fix that one. Because I worked with voices in the head with people with multiple personalities. I've worked with hundreds of different personalities on them. So I saw her 3 times, hour and a half, 2 hours each time. We found out who the voice was. You can meet the voice, talk to them, which I'll explain in a minute. The second visit, we did a bit more. The third visit, she was off all drugs, sleeping through the night, and was eating. 3 sessions of an hour and a half, 2 hours. I do the same with bulimia, normally under 10 hours. If a person has the disorder for a long time and have had years and years of therapy, they know themselves. And my work just comes across the top and finishes it off. So I've done this. So what I do is bipolar, that's quite a simple one to do. The hardest one is what they call borderline personality disorder, which now they're changing it to complex trauma. Borderline personality disorder is caused by life-threatening trauma, along with multiple personalities, which is now dissociative identity disorder, before the age of 7. And the difference between the borderline and the multiple personality is the person with, I should say, the dissociative identity disorder has a separation between the different personalities and brick walls, so you can actually work with one of them without other people interfering, and then you can work with another one. With borderline, there's no brick walls. They're all there. So when you try to work with them or talk to them, you've got 4 or 5 there yelling at you and saying you're no good and all this sort of thing, because they won't let you work with them. So that I actually haven't had one go through the whole session yet, because they're very hard to work with. But it's all fixable. Anything what's happened to you